I'm going to say something I haven't said in a decade. I'm actually excited about Game of Thrones again. Because against all odds, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has done the impossible. It made Game of Thrones good again. First, we had the original Game of Thrones. Then we had House of the Dragon. And now we have the third major installment in George R.R. Martin's televised world, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. But compared to those two other giants, this show is actually quite small and only has a budget of under $10 million per episode. And honestly, this is the biggest reason why this show is so highly rated. It understands that smaller stakes matter more. In the original Game of Thrones series, we eventually reached a point where if a dragon didn't burn down a city, it felt like nothing happened. But in this show, there are no dragons. There is no magic to be found. In this show, a knight losing his horse feels like a disaster. Before we talk about why this show works, we have to address the elephant in the room. We all remember 2019. That's when the final season of Game of Thrones aired. It turned the greatest TV show on earth into a punchline. For years the brand was toxic. Then House of Dragon arrived in 2022. Season 1 was a glimpse of hope. It felt like HBO had finally learned its lesson. But then Season 2 happened. The pacing slowed down. Everything felt so wasted. And it started to repeat the same mistakes as Season 8. Spectacle over substance. By the time A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms was announced, we were tired. But after watching Season 1, I can confidently say, this show is different, in a good way. This is not another cash grab. So what makes this show so great? A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms isn't about the fate of the world. There are no White Walker prophecies here. No massive battles. And the most important one, no one is fighting for the crown. The Iron Throne is the center of the Game of Thrones universe. And here, it isn't even mentioned. Instead, this is a story about a guy trying to find his next meal without getting his head chopped off. That's it. This is the story of Sir Duncan the Tall and his squire Egg. By scaling down the story, the show achieves something that the franchise hasn't felt in years. Gravity. When there aren't 10 dragons on the screen, a single sword actually matters. It's grounded. It's a story about just a knight trying to live day by day. The knight in question is Sir Duncan the Tall.
Sir Duncan the Tall.
Never heard of him.
Dunk is the heart of the story. He's not Jon Snow or Daemon Targaryen. He's just some big guy trying his best. Let's talk about Duncan, because he's a very different kind of protagonist for this universe. In Game of Thrones, everyone is someone. Maybe a lord, maybe a prince, or maybe even a secret heir to a fallen dynasty. But Sir Duncan? Dunk is nobody. He's just an orphan from the gutters of Flea Bottom, who just happens to be really tall. He has no legendary Valyrian steel sword, or even a family name. And honestly, he's not even the best fighter. His biggest tactical advantage is just being tall, but that's exactly why his character works. He's a nobody who chooses to be good. He's honorable, but not in Ned Stark's kind of way, but in a stubborn and more grounded way. He wants to be a knight because he actually believes that they are the good guys. In the original Game of Thrones show, Dunk would have been a side character who would have been treated as a punchline, or just a random knight who would have died in the first fight. But in this show, Dunk is the best part. The show doesn't mock him for trying to do the right thing. It challenges his belief, sure, but it never treats his goodness as a weakness. And then we have his squire Egg. He's small, he's smart, he's very bold. At first glance, he looks like the classic comic relief character. A clever kid tagging along with a giant knight. But it doesn't take long to realize that Egg understands the world in ways that Dunk simply doesn't. Where Dunk is not the sharpest tool in the shed, Egg makes up for it. He provides the book smarts and the political intuition that Dunk simply lacks. It's a perfect symbiotic relationship. They have a mentor-student dynamic going on, but it isn't just about that. They feel like they are brothers, or at least family. It's a classic optimist versus realist dynamic. Egg's story is about what it actually means to be a family. It shows that being a brother isn't always about sharing the same blood. There's obviously a lot more to Egg than meets the eye. And for those who haven't read the novellas, I'm not going to spoil it. One of the most surprising things about A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is just how small everything is. This show doesn't lean on massive CGI dragon fights or complex multi-seasonal mystery plots to keep you watching. Instead, most episodes are around 30 to 40 minutes, which is very short for a Game of Thrones series. Now, I will be honest. I wouldn't have minded another 10 minutes per episode just to flesh out the world a bit more. But the upside? There is zero filler. Most of the story unfolds just over a few days. And because the scale is smaller, the tension feels realer. When Dunk enters a tournament, he isn't fighting for the fate of the Iron Throne or even survival of the realm. He's just fighting for his right to exist as a knight. If he loses the tournament, he isn't dead. But he can't simply afford being a knight anymore because he has no money left. It turns a simple joust into a life-changing situation. This is why A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms feels so much like early seasons of Game of Thrones. We were watching actual characters we really cared about, and not one-dimensional characters. This show returns to that foundation. There's still a lot of violence, and there are still political schemes behind the shadows. But they stay in the background where they belong. It feels less like high fantasy and more like medieval slice-of-life drama. Of course, we have to talk about the source material and this show's future. Right now, the show is a very loyal adaptation of George R.R. Martin's Dunk and Egg novellas. That's because George actually helped to produce this show. But sadly, we have been here before, haven't we? We saw House of the Dragon start with a positive note, only to see it drift away from the source material by the end of season 2. In a recent interview, George R.R. Martin described his working relationship with House of Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal as abysmal. He said things started off good in season 1, but by season 2, Ryan Condal basically stopped listening to his notes. So much so that Martin claims he was eventually told to send feedback through HBO instead. We know that this franchise can go downhill again. The fear is always there. And sadly, it's still possible, because the larger story of Dunk and Egg isn't finished in the books yet. But for now, I'm not actually that worried. The only real concern I have is the Stranger Things effect. We have seen it before. If production takes too long, the actor playing Egg in a couple of years might actually don't look like a kid anymore, which could mess up the dynamic. If you walked away from Game of Thrones after season 8, this is the safest way back in. You don't need to rewatch all of Game of Thrones to understand this show. You don't need to research the family tree or any history books. It's a self-contained story. All you have to do is follow a tall knight and a bald kid down a dusty road. And for the first time in a long time, I'm actually optimistic about the future of Game of Thrones. So what do you think of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms? Is it living up to your expectations or not? Let me know in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.